They left my daughter on a bench at Waterfront Park like she was luggage somebody forgot to claim. Her, my 4-year-old granddaughter, and 2 suitcases packed so fast one of them was zipped over the sleeve of a yellow raincoat. Her father-in-law had fired her that morning. Her husband told her to be gone by noon. He said a waitress's daughter had no business carrying their family name. I told her to get in the car. What none of them knew, what they'd never once bothered to find out, was that every brick of their precious empire sat on land I owned. And the lease was about to come due. Welcome in, everyone. It's good to have you here at silverrevenge. Before we start, do me a kindness and hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. One quick note, this story is dramatized for storytelling and educational purposes. Names and details have been changed, but the lessons in it about recognizing abuse before it swallows someone you love are as real as it gets. It was a Tuesday in late September, and Charleston was doing that thing it does in the fall, where the light turns the color of honey around 5 o'clock and the whole harbor looks like a postcard. I was coming back from a meeting downtown when I saw them. My daughter, my granddaughter, 2 suitcases, a bench by the pineapple fountain. "Stop the car," I said. My driver, Boone, who has been with me for 19 years and has never once asked me a question I didn't want to answer, pulled to the curb without a word. I was out before he got it in park. Tessa was sitting with her arms wrapped around herself the way she used to sit when she was 9, and somebody at school had been cruel to her. Like if she could just get small enough, the world would lose track of her. Poppy was tucked against her hip in a yellow raincoat, even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky, holding a stuffed penguin by one flipper. That penguin told me everything. That's the toy you grab when somebody is standing in the doorway telling you to hurry. My heels hit the path and Tessa looked up. Her eyes were swollen nearly shut. She'd been crying for hours, and she'd been doing it right here, in public, because she had nowhere else to do it. "Mama," she said, just that. I did not run to her. I want to be honest with you about that, because people ask me sometimes how I stayed so calm, and the truth is, calm is a habit. I have walked into rooms full of men who wanted to see me fail for 30 years, and I learned a long time ago that the person who panics first loses. So I walked to that bench slow and steady, and I sat down beside my girl, and inside my chest something was tearing loose from its moorings. "What happened?" Her breath hitched twice before she could get it out. "He fired me this morning, my father-in-law. He called me into his office and said there were invoices missing from my events, deposits that didn't match. Mama, I never touched a dime. He had a folder." He slid it across the desk like a TV lawyer. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Then I went home, and my husband already had my bags by the door. He said his father showed him the proof. He said," and her voice just folded in half, "he said a waitress's daughter was never going to be worthy of their name. That marrying me was the one mistake his family let him make." Poppy looked up at me with those enormous gray eyes. "Grandma, are we having a sleepover?" "We sure are, Ladybug," I said, and I smoothed her hair back and I kept my voice sweet as tea, because that baby did not need to know that her grandmother was, at that exact moment, deciding to take 2 grown men apart down to the studs. I stood up. "Get in the car." "Mama, I don't even know what I'm—" "Get in the car, baby." Gentle. Firm. Boone already had the trunk open. He loaded those suitcases like they were nothing, like this was a normal Tuesday, and he held the door and my girls climbed in. "Now, let me tell you who I am, because my son-in-law's family never asked, and that was their first mistake. My name is Coralie Ashford. I'm 62 years old. My mother waited tables at a diner on Meeting Street for 26 years, and yes, that part of the insult was accurate, and I have never once been ashamed of it. I started with one sandwich shop in 1989, bought the building it sat in when the landlord got tired of Charleston, and then I bought the next building, and the one after that. I learned something ugly in my first marriage, when a charming man nearly signed away everything I built before I caught it. Money that can be seen can be taken. So when that divorce was done, I disappeared on paper. Everything I own, 41 commercial properties along the coast, the master holding company, All of it sits inside a trust called Meridian Palmetto Holdings, run through a law office in Columbia. My name appears nowhere. I drive a nice car, not a flashy one. I live in a house people would call comfortable, not grand. Even Tessa only ever knew that her mama did all right in real estate. I raised her to make her own way, and Lord, did I let that go too far. I kept my armor on so long, my own child didn't know I had any. Here's the part the man who fired her never knew. His restaurant group, 4 waterfront places, the event hall, the big flagship with his name in brass letters by the door, every single one of those buildings leases from Meridian Palmetto. He'd been mailing rent checks to me for 11 years. He'd written letters to my trust's attorneys demanding repairs, threatening to take his empire elsewhere. And I had read every one of them at my kitchen table with my reading glasses on. When Tessa married into that family, I held my tongue. I told myself it wasn't my place to mention it, that her marriage shouldn't have my shadow over it. I will carry the regret of that silence for the rest of my life. That night, I put Poppy to bed in my guest room with her penguin, and then I sat with Tessa at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, and she told me everything. And I am going to tell you, because somebody listening tonight needs to hear the pattern out loud. It started small, the way it always does. Year 1, he didn't like her friends. They were negative. They didn't understand the family standards. Year 2, he didn't like her calling me so much. He told her I'd never approved of him, that I'd said things about him at the wedding, things I never said. She pulled back from me and I thought I'd done something wrong. I thought I was giving her space. I was giving him room. Year 3, he got her the job at his father's company, and it sounded like kindness, and it was a cage. Her paycheck went into the joint account he controlled. Her hours belonged to his father. Her performance reviews happened at family dinners. By the time they accused her of stealing, every person in her daily life answered to the same last name. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked her. I had to ask. "You sat in that park for 3 hours, baby." She stared at her hands. "He told me you'd say I told you so. He's been telling me for years that you were just waiting for me to fail. And I was so ashamed, Mama. They made it feel true." I want you to sit with that. That is how it works. They don't lock the door. They convince you every other door is already locked. I tucked a blanket over her on the couch when she finally fell asleep, and then I went into my study and I opened the folder she'd brought, the one his father had slid across the desk. Forged invoices. Doctored deposit records. Whoever built it was sloppy. The fonts didn't even match across pages, but it didn't need to be good. It just needed to be enough to fire her for cause and humiliate her on the way out. They weren't just throwing her away. They were salting the ground so she couldn't sue. I poured myself 1 bourbon, and I made 1 phone call to Priya Nair, who has been my attorney for 22 years and answers on the second ring no matter the hour. "Priya, it's Coralie. Pull every file we have on the Meridian leases for the Calder's Landing Restaurant Group. That's not the real name, but you understand. And clear your week." There was a pause, and then Priya said the thing I love her for. "Which one of them did something to Tessa?" "Both of them." "I'll be there at 7. Now, I have heard people ask, in stories like this one, why a woman would burn down something she owns. Let me be plain. I never lit a single match on my own property. I didn't have to. Everything I did with paper. And every sheet of that paper, they had signed themselves. Wednesday, 8:40 in the morning, my office. Priya laid the master lease on the table and tapped paragraph 19. 2 years back, my daughter's father-in-law had gutted and rebuilt the second floor of his flagship, moved load-bearing walls, added a private dining mezzanine, and he had never once requested landlord approval because the landlord was a faceless trust in Columbia and he figured nobody was looking. Unauthorized structural alteration, material breach. 10 days to cure or quit, and you cannot cure a moved wall in 10 days. 9:15, Priya's office sent the notice of default by certified mail and courier to all 4 properties because the leases were cross-defaulted. He'd insisted on that himself years ago to get a better rate. One domino touches all of them. 10:30, I called Henrik, a commercial banker downtown who I've done business with since before his hair turned gray, back when one late payment could have ended me, and he gave me 30 days. Nobody made him give. I didn't ask Henrik to do anything improper, and I want to be clear about that. I asked him one question. If a borrower's leases go into default, what does that do to a credit line secured against the leasehold? And Henrik was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "It obligates me to review the facility immediately." That's all. The rules did the rest. By Thursday afternoon, the restaurant group's operating line was frozen pending review, and that was not my doing, and not Henrik's mercy. That was their own loan covenanters, doing exactly what they were written to do. Friday was payroll. I won't pretend I didn't watch it land. Priya had a contact who knew somebody at the flagship, and the texts started coming Friday at 11 a.m., paychecks bouncing, the seafood supplier holding the morning delivery on the dock wanting cash, my daughter's father-in-law standing in his own dining room in a $1,000 sport coat, telling his staff it was a bank error, sweat coming through his collar before noon. The man had spent 11 years believing he stood on his own ground. He was just now learning he'd been standing in the palm of my hand. Saturday at 4:00 in the afternoon, Tessa's phone rang. We were in my kitchen. Poppy was upstairs napping. Priya was at the table with a legal pad, because Priya is always at the table with a legal pad now. Tessa looked at the screen and went white. "It's him." "Answer it," I said. "Speaker?" My son-in-law's voice came out of that phone smooth as Riverstone. "Hey, Tess, how are you holding up?" Like he was checking on a sick friend. Like he hadn't stacked her life by the door in trash bags and suitcases 5 days before. "What do you want?" "I want to fix this. Dad's willing to drop the whole invoice thing. No police, no lawyers. It all goes away. You just have to sign a statement. Say it was a misunderstanding on your end. Say you made some mistakes with the deposits." "I didn't make any mistakes." I know. And his voice got soft, and I watched my daughter's shoulders start to curl, the old reflex, and I put my hand flat on the table where she could see it. "But you know how Dad is. Just sign it, and you can come home, and we go back to normal. Because if you don't," he let it hang there. He was good at the hanging. "Tess, think about Poppy. A custody judge is going to look at a mother who got fired for theft, living in her mama's spare room. Is that the stability our daughter needs? Sign the paper, or Poppy grows up calling somebody else mommy." The kitchen went dead quiet. Priya's pen had stopped. Tessa had her hand over her mouth. And my daughter, my girl who had spent 4 years being sanded down to nothing, took a breath and her voice came out level. "I'm not signing anything. Talk to my lawyer." She hung up. Then her hands started shaking and I held them, and Priya quietly said the most beautiful sentence I'd heard all week. "South Carolina is a one-party consent state, and I recorded every word of that." It was Priya who found the thread that changed everything. Going through the restaurant group's old corporate filings, she found a wrongful termination complaint from 4 years back, filed and then abruptly withdrawn. The plaintiff was a woman who had managed events at the flagship before Tessa had the job, before Tessa had the husband. Her name was Dahlia. I called her on a Sunday evening. She let it ring almost to voicemail. When I told her who I was and whose mother I was, there was a long silence, and then she said, "I always wondered who he'd do it to next." She came to the house Monday. Small woman, dark hair pulled back, the kind of careful eyes that check where the exits are. She stopped in the doorway of my living room when she saw Tessa, and the two of them just looked at each other, and I watched something pass between them that I don't fully have words for. Not recognition of a face. Recognition of a face. Recognition of a fingerprint they both had pressed into them. Dahlia spoke first. "It wasn't your fault." Tessa's eyes spilled over. "It wasn't yours either." They sat on my couch and compared 4 years like two women laying photographs side by side. Dahlia had dated my son-in-law before Tessa. Same opening act. She was special. She was different. Nobody had ever understood him like she did. Same second act. Her friends were toxic, her sister was controlling. Why did she need her own checking account when he was happy to handle everything? He'd gotten her the job at his father's company too. And when she finally pushed back, when she asked one question too many about money, the invoices appeared. The folder slid across the desk. Fired for cause. And the father had stood in that office and told her she ought to be grateful they weren't pressing charges, given where she came from. He took $11,000 out of my account before I even understood it was happening, Dahlia said. When I filed the complaint, their lawyers buried me in 30 days. I had $400 and a studio apartment. They had everything. She looked at Tessa. So I signed their paper and I disappeared. I've been ashamed of that for 4 years. You survived, I said. That's not the same as surrendering. Don't you carry their shame for them another single day. Then, Dahlia reached into her bag and took out her old phone, the one she'd kept all this time, and she played us a voicemail from a year after she left. My son-in-law's voice, syrup soft. He was sorry he'd been in counseling, real counseling. He was a changed man. Please just give him a chance to make it right. Tessa went very still. Then she picked up her own phone, scrolled back years, and played a voicemail from the month before her engagement, after their one big fight, the fight she'd told me about at the time. Word, the same apology, the same pause before real counseling, the same little catch in his voice at the end, the catch I'd bet money he practiced in his car. It wasn't remorse, it was a script. The man had a script. Priya looked up from her legal pad and said, "Pattern evidence. We're not building a divorce case anymore, ladies. We're building something much bigger." And it got bigger. The forensic accountant Priya brought in took 9 days, and what he found made the fake invoices look like a parking ticket. 12 loan documents with Tessa's signature on them. Tessa had signed 2. The other 10 were forgeries. $1.8 million in debt quietly hung around my daughter's neck as a co-guarantor, so that if the restaurant group ever went down, she'd drown with it. And there was a draft term sheet, never executed, thank God, where my daughter's father-in-law proposed pledging anticipated long-term control of the leased premises as collateral for a $6 million expansion. The man was so confident, so swollen with the certainty that nobody was watching, that he had tried to borrow against buildings he did not own. My buildings. He tried to hawk my life's work to a lender in Atlanta, and he'd used my daughter's forged name to help him do it. I read that audit twice at my kitchen table, and then I sat in the dark for a while. I want to be honest with you about what I felt, because it wasn't rage, not by then. Rage is hot and fast, and it makes mistakes. What I felt was something colder and older. I thought about my mother carrying plates for 26 years, her ankles swollen every night, and this man sneering at her granddaughter about worthiness. All right, I thought, let's talk about worth. Here's what you need to know about timing. Every fall, the Low Country Hospitality Association holds its big awards night at one of the old hotels on King Street. Ballroom, chandeliers, 400 people, everybody who matters in food and tourism from Savannah to Myrtle Beach. And that year, my daughter's father-in-law was receiving the Legacy Award for Excellence and Integrity in Charleston Hospitality. Integrity! He'd been polishing his speech for a month. The frozen credit line, the default notices, he'd hidden all of it because men like him would rather bleed out in private than limp in public. Priya took everything to the authorities first. I want that on the record. The forged loan documents, the recorded custody threat, Dahlia's voicemails, the audit. There was already a detective assigned, a thorough woman named Ramos, and an economic crimes unit moving on its own clock. What happened at the gala was not a substitute for the law. It was a courtesy I extended to 400 people who were about to applaud a predator. The night of, the 3 of us dressed at my house. Tessa in deep green, Dahlia in silver, me in black, because some occasions are funerals, even if nobody's told the deceased yet. Poppy watched from my bed and said we looked like queens going to a ball, and I kissed her head and promised to bring her cake, and she didn't need to know one thing more than that. In the car, Tessa's hands were ice. Mama, what if it doesn't work? What if they just charm their way out? They always charm their way out. I took her hands. Sweetheart, I didn't build what I built on hope. I built it on paper and patience and knowing where every door in the building is. Tonight isn't a gamble. I squeezed. Tonight is arithmetic. The ballroom was all gold light and white linen. We came in late and quiet and took seats near the back, and almost nobody noticed us because almost nobody in that room had ever bothered to learn my face. I watched my daughter's father-in-law work the crowd in his tuxedo, shaking hands, laughing that big laugh. My son-in-law one step behind him like a shadow in a rented bow tie. Watching them, you'd never know their payroll had bounced 8 days ago. That's the thing about charm. It's load-bearing right up until it isn't. At 8:30, they called his name. He took the stage to a standing ovation, kissed the Crystal Award, leaned into the microphone. 40 years ago, my father taught me that a man's name is his collateral, he began, and I'll give him this. He could deliver a line. Everything my family has built, we built on integrity. That was when the screen behind him changed. The association had hired an AV company for the evening, and the AV company had a slide deck. And slide decks have a way of being supplemented when an attorney walks in with a court-stamped exhibit list and a detective's blessing. I won't tell you exactly how prearranged it. I'll tell you what 400 people saw. The screen split in two. On the left, a photograph of a loan signature page, Tessa's name. On the right, my daughter's actual signature from her driver's license, blown up large. They did not match. A murmur went through the room. Then the next slide, another forged page. Another. 10 of them, one after the other, the room getting quieter with each click. My daughter's father-in-law turning around at the podium, his speech dying in his hands. Then the audio. 2 voicemails played back-to-back over the ballroom speakers. The same apology, 4 years apart. 2 different women's names, every other word identical. Even the practiced catch in his voice came in the same place, twice, like a record skipping. Somewhere near the front, a woman said, out loud, "Oh my God, it's a script." And the word started moving through the tables in a low ripple. "Predator, did you hear it? Word for word." Dahlia stood up. The silver dress caught the light and heads turned, and she walked down that center aisle slow and straight while the whole room held its breath. She climbed the steps. My son-in-law actually moved toward her, hand out. "Dahlia, listen," and she held up one palm and the man stopped like he'd hit glass. She took the second microphone and she faced the crowd and her voice did not shake. "My name is Dahlia. 5 years ago I worked for this company and I loved this man and they took it all. My job, my savings, my sense of what was real." She told it plain. The isolation, the account he controlled, the folder of fake invoices, the same folder, the same fonts. When I tried to fight, they buried me, and I signed their paper, and I spent 4 years believing I was the only one. She turned and looked at Tessa, back at our table. I wasn't the only one. I was just the first one they got away with. Tessa stood. My daughter, who 6 weeks earlier could not lift her eyes off a park bench, stood up in front of 400 people and walked down that same aisle and took her place beside Dahlia and said, "I'm the second one. There will not be a third." My daughter's father-in-law found his voice then, and it was the bluster voice, the one that had worked his whole life. "This is defamation. This is an ambush. These are disgruntled." I stood up. I'm not a tall woman, and I was in the back, but a room can feel a change in weather. I walked up the aisle, taking my time, the way I told you I walk, and I climbed the steps, and I stood between those 2 young women, and I looked at this man who had thrown my child away, and I took the microphone. "Most of you don't know me," I said, "but you know my landlord's name, Meridian Palmetto Holdings. We hold 41 commercial properties in this city, including, as it happens, every building this gentleman's restaurants sit in." I let that settle. I watched his face do the arithmetic I'd been doing for weeks, watched him understand in front of everyone whose hand he'd been living in. "I'm Coralie Ashford. Meridian is mine. My mother waited tables 6 blocks from here for 26 years. And 11 days ago, this man's son left my daughter and my granddaughter on a bench in Waterfront Park and told her our blood wasn't worthy of his name. I turned to him, and I kept my voice as level as a foundation slab. You wanted to talk about collateral. Here's what I know about collateral. You tried to borrow $6 million against buildings that belong to a waitress's daughter. Your leases are in default. Your loans were obtained with forged signatures, which the state already has. You are not going to lose this argument, sir. You have already lost it. You just hadn't been told yet. Detective Ramos and 2 officers were standing at the back doors by then, and that was no coincidence either, because some paperwork had come through that very afternoon. They did not let him finish the evening. They walked my daughter's father-in-law out of his own awards gala past 400 silent guests, and the crystal trophy stayed on the podium where he left it. My son-in-law tried to slip out the side and found the side door attended. He was asked to come answer some questions, and within a month, both of them were under federal indictment, bank fraud, and forgery, with more counts coming as more women came forward. And they did come forward. 3 more from years back, each one carrying her own copy of that same script. I'm not going to stand here and tell you a trial happened overnight, because trials don't, and anybody who tells you different is selling something. These things grind slow, but the empire didn't wait for a verdict. The lease is terminated. The bank called the notes. The restaurant group went into receivership by Christmas, and here's the part I am proudest of. The receiver kept the restaurants open, and the staff kept their jobs, because the building's owner made that a condition. And the building's owner is a soft touch about working people, having been raised by one. The divorce went through quietly. Tessa got full custody. He didn't even fight it, which told you everything. Poppy had only ever been a piece on his board. 6 weeks after the gala, on another honey-colored afternoon, I went back to Waterfront Park. Same bench. I did that on purpose. I believe in going back to the places that hurt you and sitting there on your own terms. Tessa sat beside me in jeans and a plain white shirt, and I swear to you her spine was 2 inches longer than it had been in September. Poppy ran the path ahead of us, chasing goals, penguin under one arm, shrieking with that pure kind of joy that doesn't know anything's ever been wrong. 6 weeks ago, I thought my life was over on this bench, Tessa said quietly. And now? She watched her daughter spin in a circle. Now I think this is where it started. Poppy came pounding back with her fist held out, and in it was a piece of sea glass, green, frosted, soft, worn smooth as a worry stone. Grandma, look what I found! I turned it in the light. You know what this is, Ladybug? This started out as a broken bottle, sharp enough to cut you, and the ocean tumbled it and beat on it and rolled it for years and years. I closed her little fingers around it, and it didn't get destroyed. It got smoothed into something people pick up and keep. The breaking wasn't the end of its story. It was the beginning of it. Poppy looked at the glass, then up at her mother. Like Mommy. Tessa put her hand over her mouth, and then she laughed through it, and she said, Yeah, baby, like Mommy. Dahlia joined us a little while later because we planned it that way. She'd just finished her first week running something new, a little nonprofit we funded together called the Lantern Line, a phone number for women who suspect the love they're living in has locks on it. She told us her first caller had recognized the pattern from the news coverage, the controlled accounts, the vanishing friends, the folder of manufactured failures, and that the woman was in a safe place that very night with her kids. And the 3 of us sat on that bench, 3 women in a row, watching a 4-year-old boss the seagulls around, and I thought, this is what winning actually looks like. Not a man in handcuffs, a stranger sleeping safe. Tessa asked me, Mama, do you think he'll ever understand what he did? Either of them? I watched the water for a minute before I answered, because she deserved a true answer and not a comfortable one. Baby, some people never have the moment you're hoping for. They don't wake up sorry. They just run out of people to hurt. Our job was never to fix them. It was to make sure they ran out. If you take one thing from this grandmother tonight, let it be this. Love should never make you smaller. And hear me clearly on this because I've gotten letters about it. Predators do not check your color, your zip code, your church, or your bank balance before they choose you. They check one thing, whether you're alone. So don't let the people you love become alone. When a partner controls the money, thins out the friendships, and makes a strong woman apologize for having feelings, that is not devotion, that is demolition, done slow. Ask the questions. Look at the accounts. They'll call you nosy. Call it protection and ask anyway. And if you are the one living it right now, sitting on your own park bench thinking your life is over, I am telling you from the other side of it, God sees you. You are not crazy. You are not alone, and it is not over. It is not even close to over. If this story helped you see something clearly, share it with someone who needs to see it too. And leave a comment, because someone scrolling through them at 2 in the morning might find your words right when it matters. This story was dramatized for educational purposes, and some details are fiction, but the patterns in it are real, and so is the way out. Stay sharp, stay close to your people, and remember what we say around here. Silver hair doesn't mean slow. It means we've seen this trick before. Good night, y'all. I keep that piece of sea glass on my windowsill now. Poppy let me borrow it, which at 4 years old is a serious act of generosity. And every morning when I make my coffee, I turn it over in my hand and think about how nothing in this story happened by accident. People call what I did revenge. I stopped correcting them. But between us, it wasn't. It was consequences arriving on schedule. Those 2 men spent years planting forged signatures, planted isolation, planted cruelty dressed up as family standards. You don't get to plant poison oak and act surprised when you wake up itching. Every notice pre-mailed, every loan the bank called, every camera flash when the detectives walked him out of that ballroom, that harvest was theirs. They grew it themselves. All I did was stop standing between them and their own crop. And here's what I want my granddaughter to understand someday, when she's old enough to hear the whole story. We didn't win because we were rich. Money was the smallest part of it. We won because of 3 things, and not one of them can be bought. The first is plain decency. I never lit a match I'd have to lie about. We took everything to the law before we took it to that stage. We kept the restaurant staff paid when the empire fell, and we told the truth in public instead of whispering it in the dark. When you fight clean, you can stand in any room afterward with your head up. Their whole kingdom was built on the opposite, on charm where character should have been, and that's why it came down so fast. Rot doesn't need much pushing. The second is a working mind. Anger wanted me to scream in that man's driveway. Thinking told me to sit at my kitchen table with my reading glasses and a lease agreement. Tessa learned it too. The night she stopped arguing with her husband's voice on that phone and simply said, "Talk to my lawyer." That was the smartest sentence of her life. Feelings are real, but paper wins. Read the documents. Ask the boring questions. Knowledge is the one weapon they can never take out of your hands. And the third is the stubborn will to keep standing. Dahlia carried her shame for 4 years and still found the courage to walk down that aisle in front of 400 people. Tessa sat on a bench believing her life was over, and 6 weeks later, her spine was straight as a fence post. Strength isn't never breaking. The sea glass taught me that. It's letting the waves tumble you and coming out smoother, not smaller. Cause and effect doesn't punch a clock, but it never misses a shift. Live decent, think clearly, and refuse to stay down. And when somebody else's harvest comes due, you won't be standing in their field. You'll be on a park bench in the gold light, watching a little girl in a yellow raincoat chase seagulls, knowing you earned the peace you're sitting in.